When I was the Prime Minister of Canada, I was often asked this question: why do you support Israel? My response, in effect, was always the same. Why wouldn't I support Israel? Why wouldn't I support a fellow democratic nation where open elections, free speech, and religious tolerance are the everyday norm? Why wouldn't I support a country with a vibrant free press and an independent judiciary? Why wouldn't I support a valuable trading partner and a wellspring of amazing technological innovation? Why wouldn't I support our most critical ally in the Middle East and in the international struggle against terrorism? In a rational world, in a world where simple common sense prevailed, the question, why do you support Israel, would be like asking, why do you support Australia or Canada? But we don't live in that rational common sense world. So the case for Israel has to be made over and over. I, for one, am happy to make it. Let me start with this. Every military action Israel has ever taken has been to protect itself. Israel is not an aggressor state. It's a defensive state. This has been true from its founding to this day. As a fledgling nation in 1948, Israel was immediately attacked by its Arab neighbors. Their goal was not to contain the tiny new country. It was to annihilate it. No nation came to Israel's aid. Not the United States, not my country, Canada, not the United Kingdom. No one. They all thought Israel would lose, but it didn't lose. It won. In 1967, Israel's neighbors again sought to utterly destroy the Jewish state, a nation that had then existed for 2 decades. Again, Israel prevailed, and it survived another all-out attack in 1973. Those are the big wars, but I'm not sure there's been a single day in Israel's entire history when some act of terror has not been waged against it, inside or outside its borders. There have been 2 bloody waves of terror, so-called intifadas, in the late 1980s and the early 2000s, when Israelis were blown up on buses, at pizza parlors, and celebrating weddings. There have been incursions from terror groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon. There have been thousands of rocket attacks from Hamas in the Gaza Strip, even after Israel completely withdrew from that territory in 2005. In between the wars, in between the terror, Israel has sought peace with its neighbors, and it has achieved peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan. For others, however, every Israeli gesture for peace is met with incitement and violence. I recount this history for one reason. Any nation that has endured what Israel has endured could easily have become a police state. But through it all, Israel has never abandoned its commitment to the rule of law, to democracy, to tolerance. 1/5 of its citizens are Muslim. They enjoy the same rights as Jewish citizens. They occupy key positions in the nation's courts, press, and government, and they have their own parties representing them in the Knesset, Israel's parliament. To say that Muslims in Israel are the freest Muslims in the region is an understatement. How about this as a human rights test? Prisoners in Israel, be they Jewish or Arab, are well treated, well fed, and have access to the best possible medical care. Parents and spouses of these prisoners know where they are and that they are safe. Who else in the region but Israel can make that claim? Through all the wars and all the terror, Israel has survived, and especially in the last 20 years, it has thrived. It's known as Startup Nation, and with good reason. Key components of your cell phone and your laptop were designed in Israel. A drug or a medical device that has saved your life or the life of a loved one may have been developed in Israel. Yet there are leftist politicians, activists, artists, academics, and college students who devote their lives to denouncing Israel, calling for boycotts, demanding it be cut off from academic and professional societies. Do they denounce the Palestinian leadership that hasn't held an election in well over a decade? Do they denounce the leadership of Hamas, who use women and children as human shields to protect their fighters? No, they denounce free, vibrant, democratic, innovative Israel. With all the brutal and violent regimes, not only in the Middle East, but around the world, how is one to explain singling out Israel for condemnation? Sadly, only one explanation fits: anti-Semitism. Do these haters of Israel question the legitimacy of any other democratic nation, of any nation for that matter? Of course, the answer is no. Somehow they only managed to oppose the Jewish one. The State of Israel has now existed for 70 years. It is one of the freest, most prosperous, most successful nations on earth. Why do I support Israel? Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't anyone? I'm Stephen Harper, 22nd Prime Minister of Canada for Prager University.
It's funny how Canadian and American presidents or ex-presidents refer to themselves or are referred to by what number they were in the listings of presidents. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and as ever, a very warm welcome to the Booms and Busts podcast. My name is Jonathan Davis. Today is Monday, the 27th of May. Why wouldn't you support Israel? There's only one reason that I can think of, and it's got nothing to do with geography. You know, Israel was established in 1948, and I'm looking at a map of the Middle East stretching from the west coast of Africa into Pakistan, Muslim countries. You know, in Morocco, which is just under Spain, it's just 8 miles over the Mediterranean from Spain to Morocco. In 1948, there were 265,000 Jews in Morocco, which is in the far northwest of the African continent. By 2017, 2,000. In the next door country, Algeria, in 1948, there were approximately 140,000 Jews. By 2017, 50. Not 50,000, 50. And this is replicated right across the so-called moderate Muslim countries. Tunisia, 105,000 down to 1,700. In fact, nearly 1 million Jews have had to flee violence and discrimination in their Arab homelands. And they did that during the founding of Israel in the late 1940s. It was that quick because they were being hounded because a country was being established. Can I point out to you that the BBC wants to conceal Palestinian anti-Semitism, aka racism, which is the sole reason for opposing the state of Israel. When Palestinians use the word Yahud, the BBC will report this as meaning Israel. They do not mean Israel, they mean Jew. Palestinians mean to annihilate Jews. Today is the 27th of May. On this month in history, on the May the 24th, 1986, the saintly Margaret Thatcher made history when she became the first sitting British Prime Minister to visit the Jewish state of Israel. So just think about that. From the 1940s to the 1980s, not a single British Prime Minister would set foot in Israel and show their absolute approval for democracy and free speech and a beacon of light in that dreadful part of the world, the Middle East. She said, quote, "I come to Israel as a friend, indeed an old friend. I am proud to be the first Prime Minister to make an official visit to Israel." Indeed, she should have been proud. Germany's government commissioner on anti-Semitism, if it wasn't so ugly, it would be funny, has warned Jews about the potential dangers of wearing the traditional yarmulke cap in the face of rising anti-Jewish attacks. In other words, if you're Jewish, and because we've let all these anti-Semitic Islamic terrorist immigrants into Germany, you can no longer walk around and be Jewish. And it's your fault because you're wearing a cap. Bob is a progressive school teacher. Bob wants to be a good progressive. Bob is worried that if he teaches what Islam teaches about homosexuality, he'll be homophobic. But if he teaches a pro-LGBT message to his Muslim students, he'll be Islamophobic. What should Bob do? Answers on a postcard to anyone who isn't a socialist, because if they are, they won't listen to you. Also in this month in history, May the 19th, in the year 804, Alcuin of York died. Who? Well, he became an advisor to Charlemagne and the most prominent figure in the Carolingian Renaissance. That's the rebirth of classical learning under Charlemagne. He also devised a handwriting system using small and capital letters for easier reading. In the 8th century, Alcuin of York devised the writing system that we use now, and no doubt we'll use for another 1,000 years. That makes you think, doesn't it? Okay, it's the Monday after the week before of the Euro elections. Just put into context, this is global. Populist movements which barely existed 4 years ago. Trump, Brexit, Spain, that's Vox, Germany, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, the Liga in Italy, Salvini, Sweden, the Sweden Democrats, Bolsonaro in Brazil, the AMLO in Mexico, the Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vests in France, who are still at it into the 7th or 8th month. Not a single mention in the national broadcaster of the United Kingdom, which, of course, we're told time and time again is the most respected broadcaster in the world. Just like, of course, the NHS is the envy of the world. We've also got a huge result for Orban and the defenders of Christian culture in Hungary. His party Fidesz breaking 50% share of the vote. It's funny, these Hungarians keep re-electing him. He must be such a racist. Salvini's Liga got 6% of the vote in 2014. They just got 35%. I wonder what Salvini's going to be doing now. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to spend too much time at all on the Euros. It's been thrashed to death elsewhere. But I'll tell you, it's the end of the beginning, to paraphrase Winston. Tommy got the highest independent vote in history. Still, of course, not enough to win a seat. But then again, he was banned from social media. It's alleged the government paid for advertising, impugning and lying about him. Can I just say well done the numpties on the UKIP NEC for not allowing him into UKIP. I'll come back to UKIP in a sec. So, on the 7th of June, Theresa May leaves. And I heard one of the greatest lines of all time on the radio, Frankie Boyle. Oh, what a guy. He said, Theresa May has the charisma of a war crime. On the 10th of June, the Tory leadership campaign begins, and they'll have a new leader by the end of July. There are loads of applicants for the job. The Tory MPs are going to whittle it down to 2, that they will then go out to hustings and Tory members will vote. Now, surely, Tory MPs will not deliver another Remainer leader after the results of yesterday. Surely they wouldn't be that stupid. Or am I being naive? I'll say this to you. If the Tories deliver Brexit, in other words, they put someone like Johnson or Raab, or maybe on the outside, McVeigh or Baker even as leader, although, if it's going to be anyone, it's going to be Johnson or Raab. On the Leave side, doesn't really matter who it is on the Remain side, because the Tory MPs will vote for the Leaver. But the question is, of course, is whether or not the Tory members. It's a question whether or not the Tory MPs allow a Leaver on that last 2. As I say, surely, based on yesterday, they wouldn't do that again, would they? Major, Cameron, May, one after the other. And before that, we had the great Margaret. Before that, we had Heath. I mean, seriously, when are they going to learn that one nation socialist Toryism doesn't work? When? Well, we'll find out in July, no doubt. As I say, if the Tories deliver Brexit, then the Brexit Party is dead, because everyone will vote Tory if there's an election. But and if there's not an election, which actually I would be amazed if there was, I can't imagine there's going to be a general election. But if the Tories elect a Leave leader, and we actually leave as opposed to in name only, then the Tories will win by a landslide in 2 or 3 years' time. There's no doubt, and there'll be no need for the Brexit Party. I know what they're saying, that they're going to put up 650. I know that, but I just don't think they'll do particularly well in the polls. If the Tories deliver Remain, UKIP is dead, and of course, it may be dead anyway. So one of the big winners of the Euro elections, of course, was the Liberal Democrats. Can I just point out to you that on the 15th of May, the Liberal Democrats cleared, and the news lasted a nanosecond, it was never heard of again. They cleared the ex-leader David Steele of wrongdoing, despite him admitting that he didn't act, knowing full well that Cyril Smith, as a leading Liberal politician, had been a paedophile. This is the party that did well. This is the party that Remainers vote for. Does make you think. Germany, we see, is the 114th easiest country in the world in which to start a business. That is third worldy. 114th, according to the World Bank in the 2018 report. The UK is the 19th easiest country in the world in which to start a business. We should be the first. In history, since just after the turn of the 20th century, Labour has had 18 leaders. from Claire Hardy to Jeremy Corbyn. How many of them have won a general election? How many Labour leaders have won a general election? I'll give you 5 seconds. Ding! 4. Only 4. Ramsay MacDonald, Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson. A pound in your pocket will not devalue. and Tony Blair. Yeah, interesting. So, social media. It's seriously concerning. Wave 1 is that they ban, exclude, restrict Alex Jones, Milo, Paul Joseph Watson, Tommy Robinson. The next wave is that they go after the quasi-politicians, Raheem Kassam, Imam of Peace, Tawhidi. Then they go for the so-called conservative broadcasters like Andrew Neil, Piers Morgan, even Morrissey. Yes, Morrissey. Then they go for the conservative politicians, Farage, Ron Paul, Donald Trump Jr. And if they're not brought back to heel, then they will go for actual conservative leaders of governments, Donald Trump and the likes of Dominic Raab, Boris Johnson, etc. This is big tech and the party of Davos plan to kill conservatism, waves 1 to 5. Donald Trump, you really need to do something about the unhinged and unbelievable bias in social media, in Facebook, in WhatsApp, in Twitter, Snapchat, YouTube, Google, and so on. It is horrendous and it's very, very serious. Now, in a similar vein, it's absolutely fantastic. Donald has issued a memo on declassifying materials related to intelligence probes into the 2016 campaigns. Well, I say, lock her up. They're finally doing it. You know, when Mueller found nothing to hang the Democrats' hat on Trump, that was the Trump side blowing the whistle saying, great, let's get this done now, lads. So they're going for them. They're going for the FBI. They're going for the liars in Congress. Lock her up. It's the end of the beginning. This month, while running a facial recognition pilot, one man, understandably in my humble opinion, covered himself up. The Metropolitan Police forced him to show his face and then fined him for disorderly conduct. There's a video on the web. Separately, last week, the first major legal challenge in the UK over police use of facial recognition technology began in Cardiff. Mr. Ed Bridges has crowdfunded action against South Wales Police over claims that the use of the technology on him was an unlawful violation of privacy. Mr. Bridges also argued the surveillance method breaches data protection and equality laws during a hearing at Cardiff Civil Justice and Family Centre. The father of two claims to have been scanned by automatic facial recognition, AFR, at least twice, including during a shopping trip in December 2017. Quote, I popped out of the office to do a bit of Christmas shopping, and on the main pedestrian shopping street in Cardiff, there was a police van. By the time I was close enough to see the words automatic facial recognition on the van, I had already had my data captured by it. That struck me as quite a fundamental invasion of my privacy, unquote. The civil rights group Liberty, which represents Mr. Bridges, has described the current use of AFR as equivalent to the unregulated taking of DNA or fingerprints without consent. We don't yet have judgment on the case. 3 UK police forces have used facial recognition in public spaces since June 2015. South Wales, Metropolitan, and the Leicestershire Police Forces. Little note about the Booms and Bust podcast. Download numbers, I'm absolutely over the moon to say, are up 25% on this time last year. Why do I podcast? It takes me the best part of a day to do it, from start to finish. Doesn't pay me a penny. Why do I do it? Why do I podcast? Because I feel that there are so few folk out there spreading the message of free markets, of liberty, of freedom of speech. And I just feel that if other people aren't going to do it, then I'm going to do it. I'm not saying there aren't other people doing it, but not enough. So I'm doing my little bit. Also, I want to help the workers of the world. I want to help them. Because socialism and crony capitalism do not help the workers. They hinder the workers. Take the case of British Steel, which went into administration last Wednesday, the day before the EU elections. How ironic, the date. British Steel was required to pay £120 million green tax to the EU under its carbon emissions trading scheme. And it was up to here in Hawke, in debt already, and it just couldn't borrow any more. And everyone was crying out, bail them out. Oh, the poor workers in South Wales, it wasn't South Wales, the poor workers. I'm thinking of the South Wales Port Talbot about 3 years ago when a similar situation. Maybe it is the same crowd. Frankly, off the top of my head, I can't remember. And I said then, and 3 years ago, and I say again today, bailing out failed businesses does not work. And they said, oh, bail out the workers, the poor workers. To which I say to you, as an example, why should a worker in East Yorkshire on £24,000 a year with overtime, with 3 kids and £170,000 mortgage, why should that person indirectly pay for workers in South Wales? Because the bailing out would come from the government. The government has only 2 sources of finance, taxation and borrowing. To which you maybe say, well, if they don't raise taxation, they just borrow it. How does that affect the guy in East Yorkshire? Listener, the mechanics of debt, of government debt, is very straightforward. The more you borrow, the more you devalue your currency. The more you devalue your currency, particularly for an importing nation as we are, the more you raise inflation, the cost of living. That East Yorkshire bloke will find in due course that he cannot survive because his cost of living has risen so high and his earnings have hardly risen at all. I have a chart here prepared by the Bank of America Merrill Lynch Global Research and published by Bloomberg. Now, it's for the US, but I can assure you it's the same all over the Western developed world. From the 1960s, average hourly wages rose from $2.50 an hour to currently $22.50 an hour. Just under 10 times. You think, well, that's fantastic. The workers must be raking it in. But when you adjust the numbers for inflation and put it all into April 2019 prices, this is the reality. Back in the early 60s, when they were earning $2.50 an hour, that actually bought them $21 an hour purchasing power. Their purchasing power peaked in 1972 at $24 an hour equivalent, and it troughed in 1995 at $19 an hour. Today it is $22.50 an hour. In other words, real wages have not increased in 55 years. So how are we better off? Because that guy in East Yorkshire's got a £170,000 mortgage 50 years ago. In today's money, it would have been a £40,000 mortgage. And he would have been able to prosper, and his children would have done very well, as they did. They tell me, oh, I agree about not bailing out the banksters and the bankers and the banks, but you should bail out the steelworkers. You're not bailing out the steelworkers at all. You're bailing out the crony capitalists who paid an absolute arm and a leg for those works in the expectation that when or if it went belly up, they would be bailed out. They didn't give a damn about how much it cost. And how did they get the money to buy it out in the first place? They borrowed it from reckless banking lenders who rightly believe that when they go bust, they will not be allowed to go bust. That is why I say again and again, ban bank bailouts. Glass-Steagall, separate investment banks from retail banks. If the bankers want to play with other people's money and their money, let them do it. But don't bail them out because there are depositors involved. We're told in a new report, and I'm sure we're all delighted, that the number of public sector staff retiring on £100,000 a year has recently trebled. Isn't that good? That's their pension, not their salary. If it hadn't been for the EU referendum in 2016, the British people would have continued to be in the dark about the EU's federalisation plans, the defence plans, the tax plans, the United States of Europe plans, the complicity and incompetence of most British MPs, and the treacherous and underhand operations of top people in the civil service. The Equal Pay Act, 1970. Health and Safety at Work Act, 1974. Race Relations Acts, 1965, 1968, 1976. Holidays with Pay Act, 1935. Where was your EU then, which came into being in 1993? UK law is stronger than the EU's on annual leave, maternity leave, and maternity pay. And when you hear the scum in the Labour Party saying we need to do a deal with the EU for workers' rights, it's bald-faced lies. You know, for every MEP in Malta, there are 71,000 residents. It's 103,000 in Luxembourg. Denmark, it's 440,000. In the Netherlands, 592,000. In France, 830,000. Spain, 846,000. Germany, 848,000 residents for every MEP. Where's the UK? 908,000 for every UK MEP. 908,000 residents. Malta, 71,000. Why do we put up with such little influence? So, it's bank holiday weekend. I was lying in bed, a cup of coffee. I was thinking about a wonderful holiday I took crossing America on the Route 66. Remember, after a couple of days, stopped off in this little town for a bite and a rest. I was sitting with my wife in the diner and I looked across the road and there was a house with a sign said, "Talking dog for sale." Well, we smiled. Anyway, after our meal and she was sitting there reading, I said, I'm just going to go across and have a chat and see what this is all about. I knocked on the door and he said, "The dog's round the back, go and have a chat." I thought, that's an interesting one. So I went round to the backyard and there was a dog, a Labrador. And I looked at him and I thought, okay, I'll play the game. And I asked, "Do you talk?" And he looked at me, you know, with those doggy eyes that are kind of sad, but are kind of happy because he's with his master. And he replied, "Yes, I talk." Well, when I got back my composure, I asked him to tell me his tale. Get it? And he said, well, when I became a young man and I realized that I could do this thing that humans can do, I joined the CIA. And they took me all over the world and put me in meetings with major global leaders and important people. And of course, they didn't suspect that I was taking in whatever was being said, and I'd report back to my handlers and whatnot. But after several years, I thought, well, you know, I'm getting on. I'll start taking it easy. So I came back here and I got a job at the local airport. And again, I was listening in on international travelers. And I was semi-retired and I got married and I had my pups, as you can see. And now I'm just enjoying life. Now, by this point, the owner had come out the back door, and I just turned to him and I said, "Okay, how much?" And he said, $10. I said, "Really? Why so cheap?" He said, "Sir, I'm a Christian man. And this unchristian dog is a liar. He has never set foot outside of this backyard in all his life." I read that a witness has testified in court that a senior FIFA official has taken bribes of around $1 million to secure Qatar the hosting of the 2022 World Cup. Shocker, huh? It's like Renault in Casablanca. I am shocked to hear there's gambling going on in this casino. Talking of casinos, you know, since the great financial crash, the mortgage crash, subprime mortgage crash, whatever, I call it the banking cartel criminality myself. The fines that the banks have paid, Bank of America, $76 billion, JP Morgan, $43 billion, Citigroup, $19 billion, Deutsche, $14 billion, RBS, $10 billion, Paribas, $9 billion, Credit Suisse, $9 billion, Goldman Sachs, $8 billion, UBS from Switzerland, $6 billion, and they're all still in business. And we're talking criminality, because there was no way on earth that a single senior banker was actually going to be prosecuted. And I remind you that every single cent of those fines, and clearly we're talking in excess of 100, in fact, we're talking in excess of $150 billion. It was the shareholders that paid for it. The bankers and their bonuses, they kept on high. If anyone else had committed fraud, even to a fraction of the level that these guys did, they would have thrown away the key. I remind you that there's so much that I miss off podcasts. I'm already at 43 minutes and I'm still talking about this stuff. We've now got negative rates in Danish mortgages. We've got the US wanting to end United Nations Human Rights Watch, climate change, the diversity nonsense I just mentioned. You know, in the University of Michigan's diversity office, the payroll is $11 million per annum. A third of the staff are on six figures. The diversity office. Chinese technology theft. Huawei was started by stealing, yes, the company started by stealing one of Cisco's routers. That's how Huawei started. Ramaphosa being elected Prime Minister in South Africa, one of the next candidates to be the next Venezuela, he said, there shall no longer be any person in this land who will be unable to meet their basic needs. That's what communists have been saying for 100 years. The conservative Modi wins again in India. Buy India, folks. Buy emerging markets. On the 6th of June, 2019, we will see the last major D-Day anniversary, the 75th, that actual veterans will attend in any number. To say thank you is inadequate. When you're lazing on the beach this summer, try to remember what your grandfathers did for you and for your children on those beaches in 1944. There's a fort on the coast at Newhaven in the south of England with a superb museum of the D-Day landings. I've been there. It's really very much worth a visit. If you happen to be taking the ferry this year, go via Newhaven. Stay the night before and spend the afternoon before your ferry at the Coastal Defence Installation. On May the 24th, 175 years ago, Samuel Morse tapped out the first telegraph message from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore. It said, "What hath God wrought?" And another amazing technological innovation because of capitalism. because of free markets. Here's an interesting statistic. The world population is changing. For the first time, there are more people over the age of 64 than children under the age of 5. That means, no doubt, that a lot of people will be taking money out of pension funds, not putting money into pension funds. They've been saying for the last 5 years that this is going to whack stock markets. Well, they've been wrong for 5 years. Yet another bear case in the dustbin. Economics. Yeah, interesting Twitter thing. This old guy, Harold Malmgren, who is Pippa Malmgren's dad, he was in the US government for, I don't know, decades. And then his daughter worked for Reagan or Clinton or someone, or Bush, I don't really know. And he's a great guy, actually, Harold Malmgren. He's a great guy. He said if the economy were to tank next year, voters wouldn't care about who Trump blames. They were talking about the Fed and interest rates. A deep downturn would hurt Trump and the entire Republican Party in 2020, whether it's fair or not. Well, okay, that's a view. So I wrote, no recession on the cards within 18 months. Another macroeconomist wrote back to me and some others, that's a seriously brave call. To which I replied, it really isn't. So this macroeconomist bloke, brought in very well-known people in the Twitter sphere and in macroeconomics to throw brown stuff at me. So I wrote privately to him, here involving people who've been bearish for years, they've been wrong for years and still are. Nothing in the charts or fundamentals suggests a near-term recession. You should listen to my podcasts. So one of these well-known, legends in their own lunchtimes, he wrote to me, it's a recession because, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, the serious folk watch the charts and it's a global stocks multi-year bull market till it isn't. All the best. He came back and said, absolutely correct. This guy, by the way, was Lance Roberts, which is why if you actually read what we write, why on earth would I read what you write? I don't care what you write. You will know that we have been invested and remain that way. Cheers. This other chap came in, Keith Lau, and he wrote to Lance Roberts and copied us in. You're long stocks. All your writings say huge crash bear soon. Why would you be invested? I understand why you write the way you do, but if you're invested, there's no crash soon, then why not write that you're bullish till you sell out? Me, I just laughed into my beer. They're all charlatans and snake oil salesmen. They're selling their newsletters. They're not actually helping anyone except themselves. UK house price index to March, year on year, house prices up 1.4% nationally, been down for the last 2 years in London. UK retail price index, 3%. So, for the last couple of years, house prices haven't kept up with inflation, which means that earnings is not going to keep up with inflation. You watch in due course. You watch. Just like I was saying earlier, about 50 years of early earnings only standing still for 55 years, the difference is debt. Now, in America, the market is actually pricing in an 80% probability of a Federal Reserve rate cut this year from 2.5% to 2.25%. And the market expects a further cut next year. Now, surely this is going to reduce the value of the dollar. We'll come back to that. The Fed wants higher inflation. It always did. I've shown you that inflation-adjusted hourly wages haven't changed in 55 years. Higher inflation crushes real wages. The central banks of the world always want higher inflation and a lower currency. Well, almost all of them. Certainly those that are in the banking cartel. Well, not certainly, almost certainly. Not if you look at Switzerland. Switzerland gets it. Why don't we? Now, the market is positioned hugely for a bull market in the US dollar, according to the Commitment of Traders report. Hugely, really hugely. And yet, when I look at a weekly chart of the dollar index, going back to 2016, I see the index at a level of 102 in December 16. I see it falling down by early 18 to an index level of 88, and I see it now at 98 or so. If you zoom in and you look at just the last few months, you'll see that the upper resistance level is about 97.75. And it got above there a few months ago, and it got there again last Wednesday. And on Thursday it sold off, and on Friday it sold off. It will be very interesting indeed if we have seen a double top in the US dollar. And it will be very interesting if we actually saw a bull trap. In other words, the market got people long in the dollar, and then the market is going to wham, bang, bring the dollar down sharply, and all those people are going to lose a bag of money. It'll be very interesting. As I say, the dollar comes down because the market expects rates to fall. It's going to be great for emerging markets, great for commodities. Greece, I've talked about, and the market response to the Euro elections has been absolutely electric. Today, the 27th of May, the Greek market is up 6.5%. It's in a multi-year bull market. We saw a major low in early 2016. It went up sharply by about 100% by July of 17. From then, it's corrected materially, and it seems to have double bottomed at the end of 2018. Indeed, from then to today, the index I'm looking at is up from 0.7 to 0.92. Now that's a 25-30% rise in a few months. And as I say, that includes a 6.5% rise just today. As far as I'm concerned, Greece is in a medium and long-term bull market. How am I doing for time? 56 minutes. Okay. I mentioned Tesla in the past, and I mentioned Elon Musk's Starlink business, where he's sending up 12,000 satellites to go around the Earth, and it's going to create a fiber optic free internet. They're sending up 60 at a time. The market believed it was going to be about 30 at a time, so it's going up quicker, double the speed that they said. Very soon, by next year, there'll be 12,000 satellites up there owned by Starlink. And remember, light travels quicker through the air than even through fiber optic cables. Thus, we're going to have super incredible fast internet within a few years. It's a massive game changer. Gold or silver, to be exact, there is a possibility that silver is on its way. It appears to have double bottomed at around $14.3 or so. It appears to have double bottomed. $15 certainly is on the cards, I would suggest, in a rally bounce, should I say. If it breaches 15, then you're going to 15.5. It's all stage by stage because that's a major resistance. If it breaches 15.5, it's then going to 16. And I'm telling you, if it gets to 16, then gold, silver, and miners are on their way. But we've got to get to 16 first, no question. Okay, let's go to some quotes of the week. I should mention that this week I'll be sending out the bi-monthly Booms and Busts report. If you don't get it, you're missing out. There's some really important info about financial markets. There's an informative write-up of special investing opportunities in most reports. The last one was on gold. The January one was on uranium. For a long-term investor, for your retirement, you need to read the Booms and Busts report. Just send me your email address and your full name and request subscription. It's free. You will never be junk mailed. From Camille Paglia, it is capitalism that ended the stranglehold of the hereditary aristocracies. It raised the standard of living for most of the world and enabled the emancipation of women. From Dr. Adrian Rogers in 1931. You cannot legislate the poor into freedom by legislating the wealthy out of freedom. What one person receives without working for, another person must work for without receiving. The government cannot give to anybody anything that the government does not first take from somebody else. When half of the people get the idea that they do not have to work because the other half is going to take care of them, and when the other half gets the idea that it does no good to work because somebody else is going to get what they work for, that, my dear friend, is about the end of any nation. You cannot multiply wealth by dividing it. Ain't that the truth? George Carlin. Son, most dumb people are too dumb to realize they're dumb. That's why they say really dumb shit, but sound exceptionally confident, like they know what they're talking about when they don't. There's a lesson in there. Nobody talks about this. Let's leave it at that. Listener, I've had an absolute blast. I'll see you next time.